When we think of a narcissist, many people have a clear image in mind. Someone self-obsessed, constantly craving attention, admiring themselves in the mirror, and dominating every room with their ego. But this stereotype only shows half the picture, and often prevents us from recognizing narcissism where it's truly dangerous. Myth number 1. Narcissists are always loud, arrogant, and obviously self-absorbed. Reality. There is also covert or vulnerable narcissism, and it's often harder to detect. These individuals may appear shy, fragile, even helpless. They avoid the spotlight, seem modest and self-critical, but inwardly everything still revolves around them. They manipulate not through dominance, but through victimhood, guilt-tripping, and emotional dependence. This covert narcissism is especially insidious because it evokes empathy. You want to help, you want to save them, and that becomes fertile ground for emotional manipulation. The quiet narcissist is rarely recognized as such, because their tools are pity and moral superiority, not loudness. Myth number 2. Narcissists have high self-esteem. Reality. Behind the facade lies a fragile sense of self. Narcissists rely on constant external validation to hold themselves together. They crave admiration like an addict craves their next fix. When that supply is cut off, through criticism, rejection, or indifference, they often react with rage, withdrawal, or aggressive defensiveness. Their so-called self-worth isn't true confidence. It's a house of cards built from image and external praise. That's why they're so sensitive to criticism. One negative comment can trigger an extreme reaction, not because they're strong, but because they're internally unstable. These first 2 myths show narcissism isn't a simple personality trait you can spot instantly. It's a deep psychological pattern that can take many forms, loud or quiet, charming or vulnerable. And the more we understand these differences, the better we can protect ourselves. Myth number 3. Narcissists simply love themselves too much. Reality. Narcissists don't love themselves. They compensate for deep insecurity with a mask. What looks like self-love is often an overcompensation for self-doubt. Narcissists tend to have a shaky self-image, which they try to stabilize through exaggerated self-presentation. They only love themselves on the surface, and only as long as others admire them. The moment criticism or rejection appears, their supposed self-confidence collapses. Narcissists need an audience to feel alive. They only feel valuable when they're receiving attention, praise, or control over others. If that is threatened, they don't reflect. They attack, withdraw, or devalue. Myth number 4. Narcissists are inherently bad people. Reality. Narcissism is often a defense mechanism rooted in early emotional injury. Many narcissistic patterns develop in childhood. For example, when love was tied to performance, emotions weren't safe to express, or the child learned to appear strong to gain approval. Behind the mask of narcissism often hides a wounded person who never learned to self-regulate, and instead uses power over others to avoid feeling weak. This does not excuse narcissistic behavior, but it explains why some people must diminish others in order to stabilize themselves. They lack an inner anchor, and that's what makes relationships with them so toxic. You're not seen, you're used. The problem: many partners want to help, not judge. But narcissists rarely allow help, because that would mean admitting weakness. And that, for them, is unbearable. Understanding doesn't mean excusing, but those who grasp narcissism in depth recognize it faster and know where to draw the line. Myth number 5. Everyone is a little narcissistic, so it's not a big deal. Reality. There is a massive difference between healthy narcissism and pathological narcissism. It's true. Everyone has narcissistic traits. We all want recognition, to be seen, to celebrate achievements. But healthy narcissism means having a stable sense of self without needing to diminish others. Someone with narcissistic personality disorder, however, defines themselves entirely through external validation and becomes trapped in a constant power game. These individuals struggle to form close relationships without also exerting control. Their communication is often one-sided. Their empathy is shallow or strategically used. They praise you when you perform, and devalue you the moment you express a different opinion. Myth number 6. If I'm patient enough, they'll change. Reality: narcissists rarely change, and only with deep therapeutic work and total self-awareness. And this is where it usually fails. Awareness. Narcissists rarely see themselves as the problem. They'd rather blame you, twist the facts, or walk away when things get uncomfortable. Taking responsibility only if it benefits their image. And even then, it's usually empty words, not genuine transformation. This dynamic leads many partners to sacrifice themselves. They excuse everything, hold on to the hope that the loving version from the beginning will return, and lose themselves in the process. Because one thing narcissists excel at is creating illusions. They show you exactly what you want to see, as long as you keep playing their game. Of course, there are exceptions, but the stronger the narcissistic patterns, the less likely true change becomes. If you're in such a relationship, the real question isn't will they change? It's, what do I need in order to stay whole? In recent years, the word narcissist has become almost overused. On social media, in self-help books, and casual conversations, it's thrown around quickly, often when someone is simply selfish, cold, or emotionally unavailable. But this trend leads to a new problem. Narcissism is either trivialized or misunderstood. Myth number 7. Every toxic person is automatically a narcissist. Reality: not every difficult person has narcissistic personality disorder. It's crucial to understand. Narcissism is a complex psychological pattern with specific clinical criteria, not just an insult. Someone can be selfish or hurtful without being a pathological narcissist. The key difference lies in the depth and consistency of the behavior. Narcissists show long-term patterns of manipulation, lack of empathy, grandiosity, and a need for control. If we label every hurtful action as narcissistic, we dilute the meaning of the term, and we strip survivors of clarity. Because real narcissistic dynamics can be profoundly damaging. Those living in such relationships need precision, not confusion. Myth number 8. Narcissists are incurable and evil. Reality: narcissism exists on a spectrum, and there are degrees of severity and potential for change. Some people show narcissistic traits they can manage through therapy and self-awareness. Others live with full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, deeply rooted and rarely treatable, especially in the absence of insight. What's essential to understand: people aren't automatically evil because they're narcissistic, but their inner structures often render them incapable of real, mutual connection, and that's what makes relationships with them so toxic. Instead of thinking in black and white, ask the deeper questions. Is there real self-awareness? Do they take responsibility for their behavior? Do they show genuine remorse or calculated apologies? Is change a true desire or just a tactic? Because in the end, it doesn't matter what someone calls themselves. What matters is how they act, and whether you feel safe, seen, and respected in their presence. If that's missing, it's not about labels. It's about survival. The greatest danger in the myth surrounding narcissism isn't that they're wrong. It's that they leave us uncertain. We begin to doubt our perception, wonder if we're exaggerating, if we might be the problem. And that's precisely how narcissistic patterns persist, through confusion and self-doubt. The truth? Your best protection isn't suspicion, it's knowledge. Understanding how narcissism works helps you recognize it earlier and set boundaries faster. What you should know: the person isn't the danger, the dynamic is. Narcissistic people follow predictable cycles: idealization, devaluation, control. It's not always conscious, but it's always effective. Healthy relationships are mutual. If you're constantly giving but never receiving, if you overthink every word before speaking, if you're always explaining but never understood, that's not relationship stress. That's a red flag. You're allowed to trust your gut. Even without evidence, persistent unease is a valid signal. Your intuition often knows before your mind catches up. Many survivors say, "Deep down, I always knew something was off." Change is only possible with genuine insight. Not every narcissistic trait is dangerous, but any pattern that consistently hurts you must be questioned. If nothing changes despite countless talks, maybe it's not your delivery, but their lack of willingness. Self-protection is not harshness, it's self-respect. You don't owe anyone infinite patience. You don't have to prove your loyalty. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to put yourself first, especially if they never did. Because here's the deepest truth about narcissism. It's not about changing them. It's about finally feeling yourself again and trusting what you already know to be true. Stay vigilant, stay wise. With love, Mental Moments.